His name was Dennis Holt, and he was very good at his job. This is important to establish at the outset because the story of what he did and what happened afterward is not the story of an incompetent person making an incompetent decision. It is something more interesting and more instructive than that, the story of a competent person, a person who had been right about enough things often enough to trust his own judgment, being wrong in a way that the subsequent 6 months would make so visible and so complete that the wrongness itself became a kind of permanent record, a fixed point in the history of a radio station and a career and a song. Dennis Holt was the program director at WKTU in New York in the summer of 1984. He had been in radio for 16 years. He had developed, over those 16 years, the specific and genuinely valuable skill of knowing what would work on his station. This skill had served him well. He had broken records before most stations played them. He had pulled records that stalled before the losses became significant. He was, by any reasonable professional assessment, someone whose ear could be trusted. In July of 1984, Capitol Records sent him a promotional copy of a new single by Tina Turner. He had received thousands of promotional singles over 16 years. He had a system for processing them, a specific order of operations that took no more than 3 minutes per record, long enough to know what he was dealing with, but short enough to get through the stack that arrived every week. He put the record on. He listened for about 90 seconds. He took it off. He called the Capitol Records rep and said, "This isn't going to work for us." The rep asked why. Dennis Holt said what he had concluded in 90 seconds of listening: the song was too slow. The rhythm was languid, unhurried, operating at a tempo that did not match the energy of his station or the expectations of his audience. Tina Turner was rhythm and blues and rock. She was raw energy and screaming vocals and the explosive live performances that had defined the Ike and Tina Turner Revue, and this song was none of those things. It was restrained, it was cool. It moved at the pace of something that had decided it did not need to prove anything, which was a quality Dennis Holt had learned to distrust in pop music, where proving things was essentially the entire point. He said this song isn't going anywhere. He put the promotional copy in the pile that went back to the labels. He moved on to the next record. He had 18 more to get through before the afternoon meeting. The song was called "What's Love Got to Do with It?" What happened next followed the logic of things that are simply true regardless of what any individual person decides about them. The song went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in August of 1984. It stayed there for 3 weeks, making Tina Turner, at 44 years old, the oldest solo female artist to reach the top of that chart. It became the defining single of the summer of 1984, the song that was playing in every store and every car and every apartment in America where a radio was on. The song that people who had not thought about Tina Turner in years suddenly could not stop thinking about. The song that announced, more clearly and more publicly than any press release or industry campaign could have managed, that whatever chapter of her career had appeared to be ending had not in fact ended and was in fact beginning something that none of the people who had written her off had fully anticipated. Dennis Holt began playing it at WKTU approximately 3 weeks after he had sent the promotional copy back to Capitol Records. He played it because by then not playing it was no longer a defensible position. The song was #1, the audience was requesting it, the research was unambiguous, and the professional cost of continuing to withhold it from his playlist was considerably higher than whatever remained of the cost of having been wrong about it. He added it to rotation. He increased the rotation as the weeks went on. By September, he was playing it 12 times a day. He did not discuss this with anyone at the station. The specific quality of a professional embarrassment that you do not discuss is worth attending to because it has its own texture and its own weight that is different from the embarrassments you do discuss, the ones you can convert into anecdotes, the ones that become the story you tell at industry dinners about the time you almost missed the record that changed everything. The ones you do discuss become part of your professional mythology. The ones you don't discuss become something else. A private knowledge that sits in the room with you every time the song you said wasn't going anywhere plays 12 times in a single broadcast day. Dennis Holt was in the building every day that September. He heard the song approximately 60 times a week. He had been hearing it for 6 weeks by the time the thought occurred to him, the thought that had been building, he would later admit to himself, since the 3rd week of August, when the song hit #1 and the shape of what he had gotten wrong became fully clear. He picked up the phone and called Capitol Records. He asked for the publicist who handled Tina Turner. He explained that WKTU was playing the record extensively, which the publicist already knew, because WKTU's play data was publicly available and had been available since the 3rd week of August at Bart's, and that he would like to arrange an interview. A brief one, he clarified. 5 minutes, over the phone, something he could use as a station exclusive. He framed it as an opportunity for her, which was the language he used for these conversations, the professional courtesy of pretending that the favor was mutual, when everyone in the conversation understood the direction in which the favor actually flowed. The publicist said she would pass the request along. 3 days later, the phone on Dennis Holt's desk rang. He answered it, expecting the publicist. What he got instead was a woman whose voice he did not immediately recognize, calm and efficient, who introduced herself as Sandra and said she was calling on behalf of Tina Turner. He said, "Great, is Tina available for a quick interview this week?" Sandra said, "I'm calling to let you know that we received your request." He waited for the rest of the sentence. The rest of the sentence did not come immediately. There was a pause, the specific pause of someone who is choosing their words not because they have not decided what to say, but because they have decided exactly what to say and want to give it the space it deserves. Then Sandra said, "Tina remembers that you passed on the record in July." Dennis Holt was quiet. He had been in radio for 16 years. He had received rejections and delivered rejections and been on both sides of the specific professional dynamic that was now presenting itself to him, and he understood, in the silence after Sandra's sentence, exactly what was happening. Not because anything further needed to be said, but because everything that needed to be said had been said. Tina remembers that you passed on the record in July. 6 words, the complete accounting of the situation, delivered without anger, without the flourish of victory, without anything that could be characterized as gloating or score-settling. Just the fact stated plainly by a woman whose job was to manage the details of a career that had just produced the #1 record in America, communicating a fact that the person on the other end of the phone needed to have in his possession. He said, "I understand." Sandra said, "Have a good afternoon," and she hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Through the glass of his office, the station floor was visible, the equipment, the producers, the on-air booth where, at this particular moment, someone was queuing up a record. He watched, from his office, as the song began to play through the monitors. What's love got to do with it? 12 times a day, 60 times a week, the song that wasn't going anywhere, playing on the station of the man who had said it, wasn't going anywhere. He put the phone down. He had been wrong before. He would be wrong again. This was the nature of the job, the nature of any job that required you to make rapid assessments of things that had not yet proven themselves, to trust your own judgment in the absence of data, to commit to a position before the world weighed in on whether the position was correct. You were going to be wrong sometimes. The professionals who pretended otherwise were the ones whose wrongness, when it came, was most damaging because they had no practiced relationship with the experience of having been mistaken. But this particular wrongness had a quality that the others did not. This one had a number attached to it. #1 on the Billboard, Hot 100 3 weeks, the oldest solo female artist in history to reach it. This one had a context. A woman who had spent years in situations that had every right to end her, who had rebuilt from 36 cents and nothing else, who had been told in various ways and by various people that her time had passed, and who had responded to each telling with the same steady, unremarkable, daily determination to prove otherwise. This one had a phone call, delivered by a calm and efficient woman named Sandra, that contained 6 words and no further elaboration because no further elaboration was required. He had said the song wasn't going anywhere. It had gone to #1. He had spent 6 weeks playing it 12 times a day and then called to ask for access to the woman who made it. And she had remembered, not in the way of someone keeping a ledger of grievances, not in the way that produces bitterness or the desire for revenge, just the plain, accurate memory of a professional who keeps track of what has been done and by whom, and who had simply authorized her assistant to communicate that information to the person who needed to have it. Tina Turner did not give the interview. She did not need to. The song played on his station 12 times a day for the rest of the year, and the people who called in to request it did not know about the phone call in July, and Dennis Holt went on doing his job with the specific and private knowledge that the most important record of 1984 had sat on his desk for 90 seconds before he decided it wasn't going anywhere. He went on being good at his job because he was good at his job, and because the education of being wrong about something significant is one of the most efficient educations available to a person who is willing to take it seriously. He took it seriously. What's Love Got to Do With It played 12 times a day on WKTU for the rest of 1984. It won the Grammy for Record of the Year in February of 1985. It went on to become one of the most recognized songs in the history of American popular music. The song that announced a comeback, defined an era, and made an argument about what a 44-year-old woman was capable of that the culture spent the next decade catching up to. Dennis Holt heard it, by conservative estimate, approximately 720 times between the day he added it to rotation and the end of the year. He never called Capitol Records again. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more untold moments from the lives of music's greatest legends, the records that were almost missed, the calls that went one way instead of another, the 6 words that said everything. And if you've ever been told something you made wasn't going anywhere, tell us about it in the comments. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one of these stories.